Welcome into the show. There's a couple of things I want to get to today. In a minute, I'm going to talk about something that I see in Christianity that is a little alarming and very strange. I see people pulling away from their support of Israel, and honestly, at times, I see a little anti-Semitism going on, and it feels like it's being theologically justified. And so we're going to get into that in just a moment. But first, I want to take a look and just respond to some of the statements that NT Wright made about abortion. Everybody's talking about it this week. If you're out on Twitter and things like that, or X, there have already been a few things that I've been a little uneasy about. Some of the things that NT Wright teaches. Haven't been 100% with him all the time. I feel like sometimes he's thinking with his feelings. And kind of wanting things to be true more than he is just looking at the Bible and deciding what is true. But overall, he's seen as solid, and a whole generation of Bible scholars see him as the theologian of our times. And that's the problem when he says things like he said recently on abortion. So let's take a look at a couple of things that he said. First of all, he said there are many, many cases where it is about the mother's health. He didn't say life. We'll get to that. Health versus the health of the child or whatever. And particularly, as you cited, in cases of rape or in cases of incest, there may be a very, very strong argument for saying this ought never to have happened. And with sorrow, because we do not want to do this in principle. What's the principle? But he says, but with sorrow and a bit of shame, the best thing to do is as soon as possible to terminate this pregnancy. Okay. This first statement, there's so many problems with it, right? First of all, there are not many, many cases where the life of the mother is pitted against the life of the child. Several longtime obstetricians who have seen thousands and thousands of cases have said that it is extremely rare that it comes down to that choice of, if we try to save this baby, we're going to end up killing the mother. Like that is very, very rare. I'm not saying it never happens. It's super rare, but we talk about it so much, right? But what we are seeing now is, and you see it in the phrase that he uses, is the mother's health. We're not talking about the life of the mother anymore. We're talking about just health. And not only that, but we're including mental health many times, which in our culture is just being stressed out. So if the pregnancy is stressing out the mother at all, then her health is at risk. Therefore, it's fine to kill the baby. Then he talks about rape and incest, and as best I can understand, what he is saying is he saying that the pregnancy should have never happened, so it's okay to terminate it. I mean, that's just unreal, right? Of course, he's also making the statement in the context of the health of the mother. And so this just doesn't make any logical sense at all. I love what Charlie Kirk does when he's debating on campuses and somebody brings up this. A lot of times he'll point to a couple of people and he'll say, one of them was conceived in rape and one of them was conceived by loving parents. Which one is which, and which one deserves to die and which one doesn't? It's a stark reminder that even the kid that is conceived in violence is a human being and has a future. Again, I think he's trying. The NT Wright is trying to be so compassionate that he's losing the truth in the process. And certainly those cases call for massive compassion. Absolutely, they're devastating situations. But killing an innocent person is not the answer. And then he says, with sorrow. Then he says, with sorrow and a bit of shame, that's the best thing to do. Have you ever heard a theologian say, hey, the best thing to do in this situation is something that's going to bring you shame? When have you ever heard that? What kind of theology is that? Now, let's look at one more statement he says. He says, at the same time, there may be certain exceptions, of which severe deformity might be one, of which certainly incest and rape would be others. And in those cases, I would say the sooner the better, because at a certain point, and I'm not medically qualified to say at what point I would draw a line, then this is a viable human being that should be cherished. Man, here's the massive problem with his outlook. Basically, he's saying the sooner the better before it becomes viable. Now we see where he's coming from, right? He doesn't believe a person is a person from the moment that their unique DNA is formed or God knits them together in their mother's womb, as the psalmist says. So he's using the term viable, and he says that once a child hits viability, that child should be cherished. But he reveals the flaw in his logic because he says, I'm not medically qualified to say at what point. And that's the problem. Medically and scientifically, we know that the only difference between an embryo and a 2-year-old is location, stage of development, and size. That's it. Everything that makes that person a unique human being is already there at conception. And for that matter, there's a difference in development between a 2-year-old and a 20-year-old. So the only line that can really be drawn is the moment that new DNA was formed. So he clearly wants to protect babies that could survive outside the womb, viable, whatever he considers viable, but otherwise he's okay with terminating. And I would say for just about any reason, because when you talk about the health of the mother and the mental health of the mother, anything that stresses the mother could be a reason to do it. And so it really could be for any reason as long as it's early on in his mind. And I think most of the biblical Christian world would vehemently disagree with him. Obviously, progressive Christians are going to love this, and they're way more concerned about how people feel about something than what the Bible says and what is true. And that's the problem with his statements, is they're going to be used by so many to promote something that grieves the heart of God because he is so influential. Okay, let's get to this other issue of support for Israel and anti-Semitism that we see going on even in conservative and Christian circles. There are those in Christian circles that think that supporting Israel is biblically not necessary and even see Israel as the main problem in all of their international conflicts. Now, as I was growing up, I felt like that every Bible-believing Christian thought that being generally supportive of the nation of Israel and the Jews was a part of the Christian faith. That didn't mean that every Christian thought that every move that the leaders of Israel made was great or was correct, but they felt that like God had brought Israel back to the land that he promised them, and bringing them back meant that eventually the temple would be rebuilt, and events like that would just bring us closer to the end times. Because clearly the scriptures talk about the end times where there's a temple again, and Israel is in their land. And we're going to look at some of that here in just a second. What's interesting is that many people at that time interpreted the Bible in what is called a dispensational way. Dispensationalism explains the Bible in movements as God deals with humanity. Now, some people say, well, it teaches that God saved people in different ways at different times. That's not true. Dispensationalists take the Bible very literally, especially when it comes to the end times. And one of the things that sets them apart from other systems is that they do not see Israel and the church as the same thing. Now, you would think that maybe that means that they lean towards the church kind of competing with Israel and the Jews, but actually the opposite is true, and I'm going to show you why in just a minute. But dispensationalists believe that the Jews are still God's chosen people, and that God still has a specific plan for them. And they see the church as birthed out of what God was doing with the Jews, so they generally have a great appreciation for the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, and the Jewish religion. And so other theological views, such as Reformed theology, teach that the church is pretty much the new Israel. Israel lost its chance to be God's people because they rejected Jesus, so they don't think that God has a specific plan that he's still working out for the nation of Israel and for the Jews. They can just join into what is happening now, right? Jews can just accept Christ and just be a part of the church. And so they see a lot of end time stuff as figurative. They don't really believe most I'm generalizing, don't believe a literal 1,000-year reign for Christ on earth is coming, and they tend not to believe in the rapture of the church. So let me be clear. I do not believe and do not think that everyone who believes in Reformed theology doesn't support the nation of Israel or has a beef with the Jews. I do not believe that. I have a ton of friends that are Reformed and don't feel that way. But as Reformed theology has kind of been on the rise, it feels like this idea that Bible-believing Christians generally support the nation of Israel and the Jewish people has subsided a little bit. And I'm not necessarily saying that for sure caused it, but what I am saying is I am seeing some people out online who are using those kind of views as justification. But if your theology does not require Israel to be back in the land, and if it doesn't see the tribulation as a time that God turns all of his attention back to Israel, then supporting the nation of Israel would kind of be irrelevant. So it kind of makes some sense. It doesn't make sense why people would maybe take that and run with it to the point that they're being racist about it. But it kind of makes sense. Reformed theology would also not likely see God's promise to give Israel the land as a forever promise. But here's the problem. I don't think we can biblically get away with overlooking all the literal things that God says about his continued plans and promises for Israel. First of all, God did promise that he was giving Abraham's people the land forever. Listen to what he said to Abraham in Genesis 13:14. It says, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are to the north and south, to the east and the west, and all the land that you see I will give you and your offspring forever. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 40, Moses says, therefore you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, that you may prolong your days in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time. So some people would look at that and go, wait a minute, it sounds conditional, right? If you don't obey the statutes and commandments, then you're not going to get to prolong your days in the land. Your days in the land could be over, but it still says he's giving it to you for all time. And so basically, it says, hey, listen, I want you to enjoy your land as much as you possibly can, and if you're living in disobedience, then there may be moments that you're not going to get to enjoy the land, not going to get to be in it. But it's still your land forever. That's what the last part of that phrase says. So even if God removes them for disobedience, it's still their land. The Jewish people are so amazing when you think about this, because really, when can you think of a time that a nation has been completely dismantled, their people ripped out of their land, and they didn't just assimilate into other cultures and disappear, but instead have reassembled twice back into their land on a large scale? It's unbelievable. Also, end times requires that the Jews be in the land and that there be another temple built. Daniel chapter 9 refers to someone who has made peace with Israel, breaking that peace in the middle of a 7-year period by desecrating the temple. Listen to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. It says, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. And in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now, there's a lot of debate about when this got fulfilled. Keep in mind that 1 7. Keep that in mind, that one set of 7 years. But it's also referred to in Matthew 24:15 and 2 Thessalonians 2:4. And see, some people will say, well, in 167 BC, when Antiochus IV came in and defiled the temple, that's the fulfillment of it. But again, Matthew 24 and 2 Thessalonians are written well after 167 BC, a couple centuries later, and they're saying it's still going to happen. Now, and it's going to happen in a distinct 7-year period in the future as well. Keep that in mind. Well, some people will say, well, it was fulfilled in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple. But again, listen to what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2, starting in verse 3. He says, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. That didn't happen in 70 AD. That didn't happen. This isn't talking about some random military leader who marched into Jerusalem and brought their heathen images into the temple courts or destroyed the temple. That's not what this is talking about. This is a specific person who is going to seek to be worshipped and make a covenant with the nation of Israel for 7 years, but is going to break it in the middle of the 7 years. So what I want to do is I actually want to read a little bit more from Daniel chapter 9, because honestly, it's the key to history. It's the key to the future, where we're headed. And he was right about all the things that have already happened. So just listen for a moment to this. It says, starting Daniel chapter 9, starting verse 22, he instructed me and said to me, the being that's giving him this vision, Daniel, I now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you begin to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you. For you are highly esteemed, therefore consider the word and understand the vision. 70 sevens are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, when he comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Now, he said up front there was going to be 70. So now we've got 69 sets of 7 years. And he says, it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. And after 62 sevens, so you got the 7 sevens and the 62 sevens now, and at the end of that 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come to destroy the city and the sanctuary, the end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant. So this new leader, the anointed one, has been cut off. This new leader shows up, and it says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. Well, we've already talked about 69 that have already happened. Before the anointed one, Jesus Christ, is cut off. Now there's one more 7 focusing on God's holy people, on God's people. And it says that in the middle of the 7, so he's going to make a covenant, but in the middle of the 7, he's going to put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So, starts out, there's going to be 77-year periods that are decreed for whom? For Daniel's people, the Jews. Remember, they're living in exile. They're wondering, does God still have a plan for us? Is God still going to use us? Is God's done with us? And so this vision comes and says, hey, listen, God's not done with you. Like there's going to be 77-year periods still where God's going to be focusing on what he's doing with your nation. But after 69 of them, the Messiah is going to be cut off. So from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one is put to death, there's going to be 7 sets of 7 and 62 sets of 7, totaling 483 years, which is the amount of time between Cyrus decreeing that Israel would be rebuilt and the time that Jesus comes and dies, leaving just 1 7-year period for God to finish up his plan for Israel. And here's what Paul calls the church age a mystery. Why? Because nobody saw that coming. Everybody would have thought, well, as soon as the 69th week happens and the Messiah is cut off, we go right into the 70th week, and all of time is wrapped up. And Jesus sets up an eternal kingdom, right? And I think maybe the disciples were kind of thinking that, and nobody saw it coming, that there would be a 2,000+ year gap. We don't know how long it's going to last between the 69th week and the 70th week when God turns his attention back to his chosen people. And so in that last 7-year period, this leader is going to emerge. He's going to make a covenant with his people, with the nation of Israel, and then he's going to break that in the middle of that and defile the temple. So here's the problem. There's a lot about what we just read that did not happen in 70 AD. Right? There's so much about what we read that did not happen in 70 AD, and Revelation clearly talks about a 7-year period where all of this happens. So what does this mean? Well, while there have been partial fulfillments of some of what is mentioned here, the final full fulfillment has not yet happened. Everything else Daniel predicted happened literally. The rise of the Greek Empire, the rise of the Roman Empire. So clearly, this also has a literal fulfillment. So what this means is that the church did not replace Israel. God is still working out his plans for them and for the physical nation of Israel and eventually rebuilding the temple. All of that is part of the plan. And in those 7 years of tribulation, God will mostly be focusing not on the church, because we will be raptured and we'll be gone, but on pursuing Israel. The tribulation will end, and Jesus will come back as a conquering king. And Zechariah says that when the nation of Israel sees that, they're not going to accept the Antichrist. They're going to say, something's not right here. We can't go with this guy. And so it's going to get nasty. It's going to get rough for them, and they're going to be struggling. And all of a sudden, Jesus is going to show back up at the end as a conquering king. And so it's interesting. The first time they didn't want to follow a suffering servant. They said, "Well, he died. I mean, clearly, like he must not have been the real deal." And then some accepted his resurrection, then most didn't. But this time, they're going to actually get him as a conquering king. It's going to be a rough road to get there. But listen to Zechariah chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. It says, "On that day I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son." So all of Israel is going to look at Jesus as he comes back, and he takes care of all these nations that are converging to fight against and just destroy and wipe out Israel. And they're all going to turn to him, because they're going to say, there he is, the conquering king, what we've been waiting for. And so in the end, Christians should still have great respect for the Jews as God's chosen people. God still has plans for them. They didn't crucify Jesus. We all did. Sometimes that's the thing, is you hear people say, well, the Jews, they crucified Jesus, so Christians, should be mad at them. Christianity is rooted right out of Judaism. All of our heroes and founders were Jews. The nation of Israel is part of God's plan, and not just the people either, the nation. And so for end-time prophecies to be fulfilled, there has to be a nation of Israel, there has to be a temple. Does that mean we can never question the government of Israel? Of course not. But it does mean that we are generally supportive of the fact that the nation of Israel needs to be a nation, and it needs to be there. And I do believe that the promise that those who bless Abraham's people will be blessed, I think that still applies. Because as we have seen, the coming of the church didn't fulfill everything that God promised to Israel. God still has a plan for them. And in just a practical way, why wouldn't we be supportive of the only democratic state in that region? The only state that works very hard to minimize civilian casualties in the midst of enemies that don't play by any rules. They're not colonizers. The land is theirs forever. And so I probably made some people mad by making this link of anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism to certain theological views. Again, I'm not saying everyone who holds those theological views feels that way at all. I'm not saying that. But I am seeing that people are using some of those theological views to justify those types of thoughts. And that's kind of concerning to me. So tell me what you think. I'm pretty sure I'm going to hear pretty quickly from some of you. This could have been a 5-week series, just kind of breaking down, why I think that the end times are going to shake out the way they are, and that there has to be a nation of Israel and a temple. We could have gone so deep, but I don't think anyone is as interested in the details as I am. So thank you for watching, and we will see you next Friday.